Hello, Brovs. We continue my Robinson Jeffers fortnight of frivolity. And this is a narrative poem, one of his earlier narrative poems, from his second book, Californians, which was published by Macmillan in 1916. It was unheralded and widely ignored. I picked it up from a online seller in Ann Arbor, shockingly, since I live about 15 miles from there. And it's mostly just the juvenilia of Jeffers, even though he would have been in his mid-30s at this time. But we'll go to this poem, the longest one in the book, Ruth, Alison. I'm probably going to make 3 videos to accommodate the 30-some pages in it. But if I can get halfway done in one video, I don't really like to go over 20 minutes anymore, but we'll see. Ruth, Alison, and I will give this preface because I don't know much about the poem. It seemingly is based upon real people, but obviously names have changed. Even location names have been altered. But apparently, if you look on the Jeffers Studies website, you can pull up a PDF that shows you some of these places. And since I haven't read it, I will not be reading into those people. I sort of looked at it, but here we go. Ruth, Alison. 2 waters of the Santa Lucian Hills, beautiful streams, were named in the elder tongue, the southern rivers, El Sur Chiquito one, the larger and more southern El Sur Grande. These elder names are later language turns into the Little River and Big Sur. Most beautiful both streams, and both to me, in memory of the day when first beheld, are sacred waters. Of the larger one I speak, under the awful shade immense it runs, of immemorial redwood boughs that downward writhe from the columnar trunks that by girth and noblest height, and form uncouth suddenly tapering at the peak, recall to mind the giant world and growths exorbitant that rose from watery soil into the fume and rush of monstrous heavens, ere man was born on earth. So huge they are. Below them, the fair current darkly flows, by dappling chance of sun made beautiful, and grace of its own ripples. As the vale widens, it widens too, more open now to daylight and the visitings of the wind. And now, as from a fugitive enlarged, the darkening redwood forests draw themselves a little backward, peopling either side the low slope of the hills, and on the bank few cedar trees and many sycamores diffuse their kindly fragrances above the flashing shallows and the clear green pools. Thus, after many miles of smooth descent, the river gains enlargement uttermost of ocean and salt waves. Midway its course within that wooded valley, and from thence to the flatlands against the ocean gulf, lie several farms, weak inroads of few men amid the imperturbable majesty of the old forests. Alison's of these, not largest, yet was loveliest, for it lay about the river's westward bend, and where a dozen rivulets danced into the stream. They threaded the small pasture as with pearls, and warbled ever in the nearby grove, notes like the lowest of a meadowlark's, and mellowest, mixed with rushing liquid noise that slipped from stone to stone. Ruth Alison, the farmer's daughter, loved to hear their voice. A lovely, shy, dove-throated maid she was, blonde as the honey that her father stored from hives with white sage pastured, of her years not past 14, yet grown to height and form of womanhood among the favoring hills. O fortunate was her inheritance more than of wealth or lordly name. She heard the rivulets in the river past her home go murmuring noon and night. She watched at eve the golden jeweled phantoms of the sky, with seasonal change above the redwood tops, wheel westward their great arcs from month to month, even as from hour to hour seeking the west in haunts deep hidden beyond the ocean plain. Or in wet winter, yet more wonderful, were the long mists and gray scarfs of the rain, when all the brooding sky, though stars were none, shone on the darkness full of secret light as the comb is of honey, and bent down to touch the trees, nay, mix with them and make their summits into darker clouds that stood motionless while the others moved among them. Nor thus alone did heaven intangible before her very eyes, and in her heart prove itself whole with earth. A warbler's tune throbbed from the water-footed alder group, sufficiently might bridge that facile gulf. Nor feeling such communion felt she less her own with both of those, unworded ever, well nigh unthought of, as too deep for thought these feelings were, this knowledge, one who dwells in the great woods, or on the ocean side, nor not strayed by much acquaintance, labors not to bring into the paltry light of speech the movements of the soul. Of song I speak not, for song may treat nobly of noble moods. Rare are the gifts of song, and many feel truths that alone the poet can word, and he not well, nor in full substance. For the rest, I hold it greatly better to be mute than speak ignobly, as the manner is of the ant hill populace, whose every mood must froth at surface easily into words. Yet did Ruth lack not for companionship of more articulate, closer could not be than with the waters and the cloudy trees and valley ferns and flowers. Her father indeed, great head and beard of russet streaked with white, thick woven, tremulous with age, wherethrough but nose and eyes were seen, an aquiline curve that, and the eyes large, tranquil, hazel clear, shy like a gentle beastie's, or Pan's own when favorable. He, fond of stream and field, was like those other comrades, taciturn and love-worthy. Her mother had more words, yet love-worthy. So Ruth was not alone, and she had had brothers and sisters 5, herself the youngest. But of those who lived, 2 dwelt in San Francisco, and 1 watched Australian herds, 1 mined Alaskan courts. 1 more there was of men whom Ruth held dear, a young man, and her mother smiled upon him, for he was pleasant to be seen and heard, tall, and of mettle and strength to mount and rule the wildest pony of the hill pastures. Nor did Ruth's mother smile the less because Paul Hayworth was the widow Hayworth's son, and of her 1,000 acres by the sea, and of her pastures and her valley farms, heir with his brothers. Ruth deemed little of this, but liked him well, and when he rode each day to visit her, would greet him gladly, and soon answered his words of love so lovingly that all the valley knew they were betrothed. Now, his maternal lands being widely flung, an orchard here, a pasture there, and tilth on the far side of the hills along the sea, and many laborers to be watched, Paul found less than he wished of time to be with Ruth. And even at the best, Ruth's mother often, bustling with irksome hospitality, came in between their converse. Therefore soon they chose a more convenient trysting place. Then the small farmhouse with its flapping doors, a redwood tree it was, hollow with age, giant of girth, and highest of all the trees that flourished in that valley. There they met each day a little, or if could not be, Paul would ride over ere the sun arose to leave within the hollow of the huge trunk word that he could not come, and of his love, which Ruth would read and kiss the paper and wish the sun gone down and risen on a new day. And when he thus was absent or had come and gone again too soon, she really failed to honey the tough bark of the old tree with her sweet lips and pressure of hands and breast, saying, "Good old trunk, my faithful, do not think because I love him I have forgotten you. No, never will I, nor your sapling kin, nor any of you all that guard my life and look upon my love." For thus to her it seemed that if the beauty of the trees were taken from her, life and love alike must wither in hard sun, 2 satin bells fallen, delicatesse, or 2 bronze fritillaries. Vast of its height and trunk, o'ertopped the wood, into its hollow an archway led with brown, deep folding bark encrusted, and within a round tower chamber opened, or a high chapel to the divinity of the wood, long dedicate. Upon its rich brown floor 2 half-lights laid their shadows. From the low and narrow archway one from above, from high, and most immeasurably high, it seemed to whosoever stood within, even from a little window that looked forth high in the narrowing trunk, above the heads and shadows of the forest round about. In such a chapel, not without strange awe standing, did gentle Ruth and her beloved make sacred vows, her mouth to mouth and breast to lovely bosom pressing. They grew whole in strong desire, one being that erst were twain. Yet such the innocence and power and awe of holiest beauty, that the man forebore, as if a naked sword had laid between, trembled within himself, tortured himself even to the heart, and virgin Ruth remained, so beauty holiest in divine desire, contented to the profitless event. The redwood in the corner farthest north stood of Ruth's father's holding, from the house a 1/4 mile and from the stream withdrawn, yet in full hearing of it, and near that road which winds over high hills through canyons deep, and by the booming shore and promontories the 40 miles northward to Monterey. By the same road a half-hour's gallop north, or less when Paul was riding, lay the farm, Paul's home. The farmhouse witnessed its own age. The central part, as the olden manor was being built, of square-hewn logs and chinked with mud, but this had since been panelled all within, and now from that rude core 2 wings were grown, each greater than its origin, nor framed of logs, but of sawn timber bright with paint, olive and green, so that the dwelling stood distinguished in the country, and far seen above its well-pruned orchard drifts of white, and rows of blackberry vines with blossom on them. For now it was the entering in of May, and all the country blithe with blossom. Now, the rains being over, every weekend night was dancing and the wail of violins at Hanlon's place. From Manville's lumber camp and from the lime kiln on the Mill Creek hills, men came, and many ranchers roundabout, or ranchers' sons, with joy foregathered there to celebrate the term of a week's toil. Paul thither begging Ruth to dance with him, not eagerly, she heard. To dance alone in the deep wood or by the dimpling water was pleasant. Yet the movements of her heart loved not a general mirth. She had no full joy in that which makes the life of many maids, or spoils it rather. Life, little and poor the spirit that most enjoys when least it is alone. The noble and pure spirit is in itself immense enough to be a multitude and needs no outward. It may pour its all in friendship or in love, all of itself. It grudges even a scruple of itself, to babble in mixture muddling heart and brain. Ruth grudged and gave to love what love desired, grudging no whit for love's sake. At the time when lingeringly above the hilltop wood, across the river day's last radiance leans in latter spring, though sundown lacks an hour for those who on the ocean headlands dwell, came Paul driving 2 horses of his best, 2 grays perfectly mated, mare and foal, quick walkers on the climb, and sure of foot to gallop down. Wide-nostrilled, too, they were, with slender legs, no fetlocks, and great throats. Ruth's father had none such. Forward they leaped, and ere the girl could greet it with her eyes, that mighty redwood, the loved trysting place, was past, and there the river with arched necks the horses ran, pounding the road to rhythm of married hoofbeats beautiful to hear. They are better under saddle than in horses. The mare, Paul said, naming them, shall be yours when we are wed, for she is quieter. the gelding mine. We shall ride often, Ruth. They were my mother's gift to me last year, my 21st. They are beautiful, Ruth said. And now they left the river, and now climbed the hill with rapid steps. The hilltop gained before them, rosy above the valley mist, shone, all his limestone height, one glow of even, tall Pico Blanco opposite the sun. Ruth on the mountain fixed her gaze, and felt the heart overflowing within her. But Paul's look gave on the next hill ridge, whereover gleamed white apple blossom and his mother's house. Before the driveway entrance, Paul drew rein, and while his horses tossed their heads and breath like smoke came from their nostrils on the cool and flush of even, he said, "Let us go in to see my mother. We have time to spare, dearest." They entered, and she came to meet them, folding the lace mantilla round her head, for she, by her marriage, though of English name, Hayworth, yet stemmed from the colonial blood that held the land before and filled the land with saints' names and the warble of Latin vowels. All Spanish hers, no Indian intermingling. Therefore her eyes, though brown, were lighter of hue than usual in the race, and taller she, and courtlier, saying, "Ah, you will dance, my Ruth. But beautiful she is, so fair, so slender. Is she not, Pablo? Hair more pale than gold, true honey color, Pablo." And again to Ruth, when they had entered the house door, "I think you do not love to dance, my dear. You go to please the boy. Then please him well, or others may well please him. Laugh, be gay. We are hard to hold, we Aleras, but are held worth holding, we." Thus did she speak and laughed, but Ruth, a little frightened, turned her face to Paul, not answering. So a man who dreads some danger on his lonely path at night, when feebly wanes through cloud a watery moon, if the close bushes crackle, he does not peer into the dark, but eyes his faithful dog, trotting before him within touch of hand. Thus Ruth, and Paul answered her with a smile, as meaning, "Have no fear, you are bound too close in love and understanding." Yet she did tremble a little, and the world of men seemed large and homeless to her, and all unlike the faithful wood and narrower world she knew. When from the lighted house they issued, lo, swift evening, in a moment, as it seemed, had fallen, and ways were dark. That limestone peak gleamed pallidly. The road fell off downhill by swift hoofs, beaten and ringing wheels, and thus, as an owl that has hung above a wood in airy gyres, I'm not sure of the word, of starlight hour by hour, but now beholds her prey, the tender leaves nibbling of cress or clover, and she falls all at one rush into the trees, and through them. Thus into the deep midnight of the trees they plunged from the high hill. Along the road was heard the murmuring of the little river. Here seemed the air stagnant and icy cold, like to profoundest waveless ocean depths, for neither those, though the azure opaque above does the sun warm, nor can he ever gaze into this gorge through the dim vast and green of undeciduous foliage, layer on layer, starproof, clothing the columns of the wood. And now above the rush of hoofs and wheels, shrill sound was heard at pulsant intervals. To such great distance, the sonorous wood carried the high notes of the fiddle. The lower and mellower, all were lost, and thus it seemed a weird and dangerous music in a dream, compulsive, not melodious. In a dream, Ruth deemed herself, and when the lights appeared of Hanlon's place, she waked. A platform stood ringed with great paper lanterns, purple and red, beside the creek and in full forest, and here the dancers danced, men from the lumber camp, men from the lime kiln in the Mill Creek hills, men from the lonely heights and valley farms. And with the men, what women? These had brought their wives, and those their sweethearts, and a few being both were neither. Merrily squealed the fiddles, and the stream murmured low. The august trees stood all about, and some fantastically were tricked with lanterns for this festival. Near to the platform was a cabin built, which seemed a larger lantern, so aglow the doorway and the windows were, and here liquor was sold, hot, acrid, biting the blood, wakening the joyous devil in a man. And I will stop at that point because we're about halfway through, and I'm not going to read for 40 straight minutes. That's all. Goodbye, bros. Goodbye.